I've been an Uber Eats driver for a couple months now. It's a poor excuse for work, especially in a small city like Lafayette. But it's been just enough to get me by until I find something better. Some nights people are generous, others they're stingy, but I can't really be mad about that. I know money's no easy thing to come by. I just have to keep reminding myself that it's temporary. Something's changed, though. I can't blame anyone for not believing me, but I have to tell someone about this. Maybe if the word gets out, it'll reach somebody who knows what I'm dealing with. Maybe they can tell me how much time I have left. Whatever this is, it's far beyond me. It started about a month ago on a Friday night. It was slower than most Fridays. Usually I can rely on the weekend bringing in the money, but I only got a few trips worth taking that night. At 9 p.m., I was just about to head back to my friend's apartment, back to the couch I've been calling home, when I heard that annoying sound Uber uses to tell you someone wants food again. Guess I forgot to go offline. I opened the app, reflexively moved my thumb to decline the trip, but then I saw the estimated fare. $78.47. I was in disbelief. I had never seen a fare that high before. Not even close. I figured it had to be a cruel joke. Sometimes customers will tease you with big tips to incentivize you to cancel any other orders and get them their food faster, only to reduce the tip at the last minute. My thumb started moving again towards that little X, but I hesitated. I couldn't bring myself to refuse it. Maybe I was desperate to make that night worthwhile. Maybe such an unorthodox fare demanded my attention. Either way, I was running out of time to take the offer. Unable to think it over any longer before it disappeared, I accepted. The trip was short and easy. I was lucky enough to already be on the east side of town, and the pickup spot was only 4 minutes away. I walked in, waited in line, went through the same steps that have become a near-nightly routine, walked up to the counter and said, "I've got an Uber Eats order for Bailey J." At the sound of that name, the cashier's faces immediately went sour. They looked at me like I had offended them just by walking in, like I'd ruined their whole day with that one sentence. After a few seconds of no response, I tried to cut through the tension that had suddenly crept over me, asking, "Do you need to see the or—" They cut me off sharply. No, we don't." One of the cashiers turned around, grabbed 3 big carry-out bags, and simply said, "Here." That one word dripped with so much spite, as if they wanted whatever was in those bags out of their store as soon as possible. I left in a hurry and had no idea why they were so upset until I got back in my car and took a closer look at the order. This person, Bailey J., had ordered 30 burgers, all with no bread, no cheese, nothing but the meat. Maybe this seems like an overreaction to you, but people don't do stuff like this. They're predictable. They get the meal, a side and a milkshake, 4 drinks with no food maybe, not 10 pounds of nothing but ground beef. So this really had me freaked out. I thought about canceling the order right there. I hadn't verified the pickup yet, so I could have done so without any real issue. What time I didn't have to think this over earlier caught back up to me, as my mind started to race with the worst possibilities. What if this is some sicko using the app to lure me to his place with the money, only for me to end up missing? What if I was murdered or kidnapped? What if the burgers were just an appetizer and I was the main course? After a couple minutes of my mind running wild with panic, my worries started dying down as I offered myself some more reasonable explanations. Some people are very picky, and maybe they just really like this place's burgers in particular. Or maybe they're planning for a week of bulking. People do some pretty stupid shit to get their protein in after all. I wasn't all too satisfied with these explanations, but they felt more likely than a psycho killer baiting me through Uber Eats. So I collected myself, found my breath again, and verified the pickup. My imagination can get away from me, but even my worst expectations failed to prepare me for what was waiting. The customer's drop-off spot was a Studio 6 off of I-49, just on the edge of where Lafayette meets Carencro. When I drove up, I wasn't exactly expecting to see the life of luxury, but this place was run down even for a highway motel in Louisiana. It was surrounded by a rusted-over chain-link fence. Most of the street lamps along the perimeter were burnt out or flickering, and there were no signs of life besides a few cars dotted around the parking lot. I was filled with further doubts as I noticed many of them were broken into and missing tires, and there wasn't a single soul around to comfort my growing suspicion that something was very wrong here. I found the right room, parked right outside it, and hurried to the door. The instructions said, "Meet at door," but I was determined to leave the bag, give a knock, and book it out of there like my life depended on it. In that moment, I certainly felt like it did. I raised my hand to give a knock, but another surprise struck me. The door was cracked open, with a pale blue light peeking through. I dropped the bag and rushed to just text them that I'd left it outside so I could leave. But before I could even open my phone, I heard a frail, cracked voice come through the opening. "Please, can you bring the food in? I can't get up to grab it." The weary sound of these pleading words made me feel something other than terror, something strong enough to overpower how jumpy I had been. I felt empathy. Many people order food because they don't have the privilege of being able to get in a car with ease to get it themselves. They might be bedridden or wheelchair-bound. Either way, they rely on people like me to bring what they need to them. So I faced the door again and replied, "I'll bring it in, 1 sec." I grabbed the bag off the ground, took a couple seconds to still my nerves, and opened the door. I was immediately greeted with an awful smell, though I tried my best to not let it show on my face for the sake of being polite. But whoever had called me into that sad little motel room was nowhere in sight. Unwilling to go any further in, I called out, "Food for Bailey J? I have the bags here. I can set them down." The voice interrupted, louder and much less weak than before. "Yes, I'm in here. Come in, please." The sound seemed to be coming from all around me, but I noticed the bathroom door was open. This was the source of that light, a bright fluorescent glow, an offense to eyes that had been accustomed to the dark of the night. I slowly crept over, my heart and mind far outpacing my feet, rapidly theorizing what could possibly be awaiting me. The smell got stronger with every step I took forward. It became impossible for me to ignore. I almost crossed the threshold when I saw a thick drop of liquid fall from the ceiling. I froze and arched my neck to see something part of me still fails to admit was really there. Just above me was a massive set of teeth, yellowed and gnashing with exposed, discolored gums. The teeth belonged to a greater mass, some amalgamation of flesh, clinging to the tiles of the bathroom ceiling. Even without eyes or a nose, it knew I had approached, and it became restless. Its tongue darted out of its mouth, reaching for something to grab hold of. Coils of muscle and tendon stretched from the mass, wildly thrashing through the air, grazing just past the top of my head. I quickly backed away from the bathroom and ran to the door, but it had shut and locked, with no attempts to flip the bolt or twist the knob making any difference. I was trapped. I started screaming out of hopes someone might hear me, but there was no stir from the neighboring rooms. I fell to the floor and began to cry when I heard the voice again. This time it made no attempt to seem meek or even human. The words boomed in my head as if they were spoken from right behind my eyes. "Feed me, and you may leave." After a moment or two of denial and acceptance, grappling for control over my next course of action, I peered back into that brightly lit room. From this distance, I couldn't see any sign of the teeth, but I could hear them chattering in anticipation. Finally, I got up, grabbed the bags, and walked to the entrance of the bathroom. Now I noticed in the corner, next to the toilet, was a shovel. I opened all the styrofoam containers, 5 patties in each one, and picked up the shovel. As I did, I could tell the mass was delighted at my cooperation, More saliva dripped to the floor as its tongue appeared again from behind its teeth. I put several patties on the shovel and lifted it up, angling it carefully to not drop any out of fear that might make it angry. It lapped the meat into its mouth and began to chew. Bits of beef and spit fell onto me. My skin crawled at the touch, but I dreaded the idea of upsetting this thing so much that I stood still and stomached it. After a few more shovelfuls, the meat was gone and the mass seemed pleased with itself. I then heard a loud click come from the door, signaling my freedom. Desperate to be anywhere but there, I made my way towards it, never taking my eyes off the bathroom. Before I could exit, that voice came from within again, commanding me, "You will return next week, same time, same day. You will be paid every time that I feed. Leave, and do not come back until you are called." I ran to my car, turned the ignition, and sped out of there, constantly checking my rearview mirror to see if I was followed. There was no sign of anyone or anything coming after me. When I got back to my friend's apartment, I thought of telling him about what I'd seen, but I realized that even I couldn't come to grips with whether or not any of that was real. I had nowhere else to stay, and I couldn't jeopardize having somewhere to sleep. He might have very well thought I was losing it. 30 minutes later, I got the notification. I received a $75 tip. Every week on Friday at 9 p.m., I get a trip offer from Bailey J. Each time the fare is higher and the order is bigger. I thought about refusing it the second time it happened, but it kept popping up. And each time I declined it, I could hear an ear-piercing sound get louder and louder, growing to a deafening volume. It didn't stop until I pressed accept. Every time I go back into that room, it's gotten bigger. It's spread across the entire ceiling now. It's consumed the shower, and tendrils of flesh now hang over the bathroom door. I have no idea what I'm feeding, what it will grow into. I was on the night shift, of course. It's always the night shift when these things happen, right? The hospital I worked at was pretty old, one of those places that had been expanded and renovated so many times, but you could still feel the history in the walls. There was one wing, though, that barely anyone liked working in, and of course I was assigned there that night. It was the West Wing, an older part of the hospital. It wasn't used much anymore except for overflow when we had more patients than beds. That night I was the only nurse covering it, and we only had a few patients scattered in the rooms. Most of them were post-op, recovering from surgery, so nothing too intense. Or so I thought. My shift was going pretty smoothly at first. I made my rounds, checked on the patients, updated charts, the usual. But when I got to room 319, things took a turn. Room 319 was tucked into the far corner of the wing, at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. I hadn't seen much activity in that room earlier, just a patient who'd come in for routine surgery a couple of days before. Elderly woman, mid-70s, nothing out of the ordinary. When I went in to check on her, though, something was off. She was sitting up in bed, staring at the door when I walked in, like she was waiting for someone. The first thing I noticed was how pale she looked. I mean, I know patients aren't exactly at their best when they're in the hospital, but she looked worse than she had earlier. She didn't say anything when I came in, just kept staring past me, like she didn't even notice I was there. I called her name, Mrs. Higgins, but she didn't respond, didn't even blink. So I walked closer, checking her vitals, trying to get her attention. "Mrs. Higgins, are you feeling okay? Do you need anything?" And then, in this barely audible voice, she whispered, "He's here again." Now, let me tell you, I felt my stomach drop. I didn't even know what she meant, but the way she said it gave me the chills. I tried to keep it professional, though. "Who's here, Mrs. Higgins? There's no one else in the room." She turned her head ever so slightly and glanced at the far corner of the room, where the shadows were the thickest. And again, in that same whisper, she said, "He comes at night." He watches. At this point, I was creeped out, but I tried to stay calm. I told her no one was there and maybe she was just having a strange dream, but she shook her head slowly. No, he's been here before, every night, just watching. I didn't know what to say. I checked her vitals again and everything seemed normal, but something about her. It felt like she was seeing something that I wasn't. I wrapped up my checks as quickly as I could and left the room, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling that something wasn't right. The hallway felt colder than usual, and I swear I could feel something watching me as I walked back to the nurse's station. A little while later, maybe an hour or so, I was doing some chart updates when the call bell from room 319 went off. I glanced at the clock. 2:15 a.m. Of course, it had to be the middle of the night. I sighed and headed back down the long hallway to her room. When I opened the door, Mrs. Higgins was sitting up in bed again, eyes wide, staring at the same corner of the room. Her breathing was shallow and her face looked even paler than before. I asked her what was wrong, but she didn't answer. She just kept staring at that corner like she couldn't tear her eyes away. I felt this sudden urge to look too, but I didn't want to. I don't know why, but something deep down told me not to look. I forced myself to focus on Mrs. Higgins, but as I approached her bed, I heard it. Breathing. But it wasn't hers. This was different. Slow, deep, and raspy, like someone standing just a few feet away, trying to hide but failing. I froze. Every instinct I had was telling me to run, but I couldn't leave her there, not like this. Suddenly, Mrs. Higgins grabbed my hand, hard. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear, and whispered, "Don't let him take me. Please." That was it. My heart was racing, but I nodded, trying to stay composed. "You're safe, Mrs. Higgins. No one's going to take you." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. I quickly called the on-call doctor, telling him that something wasn't right with her. When he came, we moved her to a different room, one closer to the nurse's station. But here's where things get really strange. The next day, when I came back for my shift, I checked her file. Mrs. Higgins had passed away in her sleep. They said it was peaceful, no signs of distress. Just one of those things that happens sometimes with older patients. But what really stuck with me was what happened after. When I went back to room 319 to grab some supplies, the air in there felt wrong. Like heavy, almost suffocating. And that corner she'd been staring at? I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like something was still there. I didn't go back into that room for the rest of my time at the hospital, and eventually they stopped using it altogether. Some of the other nurses mentioned hearing strange noises coming from that room late at night, and a few even said they'd seen shadows moving in the corner. I don't know what Mrs. Higgins saw those last few nights, but whatever it was, I think it's still there, waiting for someone else to notice it. You know when you find a place that just seems too good to be true? Yeah, that's exactly how I felt when I found my last apartment. But what I didn't realize at the time was that I wasn't the only one living there. So, a little background. I had just moved to a new city for a job. I didn't know anyone, didn't have a ton of money, and was honestly just looking for something cheap and livable. I found this apartment in an old building downtown. It was perfect. High ceilings, big windows, and it had that old-world charm, like it had been standing there for over 100 years. The rent? Way lower than anything else in the area. It was a no-brainer. The place was mostly empty when I moved in, just a couple of pieces of old furniture left behind from the previous tenant, a beat-up armchair, a table, and, weirdly, this giant antique mirror in the hallway. Now, I've never been a fan of mirrors, especially not the old ones. There's something about them that always gives me the creeps, but I figured I'd just deal with it. Besides, I thought, maybe it'd add to the vintage aesthetic I was going for. The first couple of weeks were fine. I was busy with work, so I wasn't home much, but every night I came back, I noticed this strange feeling, like the air in the apartment was heavier. I don't know how to explain it, but it always felt like there was someone else there with me, even though I was living alone. I chalked it up to being paranoid. You know, new city, new place. Just my mind playing tricks on me. But things started to get weird pretty quickly. One night, I came home late from work. It was around 11 p.m. and I was exhausted. As I walked into the apartment, I noticed something strange. The mirror in the hallway. It was fogged up, like someone had been breathing on it. I brushed it off as a weird draft or maybe some humidity from the bathroom, even though I hadn't used it since the morning. But then I saw something else, a handprint. Not a smudge or something random, a clear handprint right in the middle of the mirror. Now, I don't know about you, but when I saw that, my heart skipped a beat. I live alone. There's no reason for a handprint to be on that mirror. But I'm a rational person. I told myself I must have touched it without realizing, or maybe it was there before and I hadn't noticed. So I wiped it clean and tried to forget about it. A few days later, though, it happened again. I came home from running errands and there it was. Another handprint. Same spot. This time, though, I knew I hadn't touched the mirror. It wasn't possible. The rest of the apartment was spotless, and it didn't look like anyone had been inside. No signs of forced entry, nothing missing, nothing out of place, just the handprint. That's when I started to get freaked out. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but over the next few weeks, little things kept happening. I'd hear footsteps at night, slow, deliberate steps coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it might be the upstairs neighbors, but the sound was too clear. It was coming from right outside my bedroom door. Every time I got up to check, there was nothing there. But the sound, it was real. I know what I heard. One night, things got worse. I woke up in the middle of the night, my room completely dark except for a sliver of light coming from the hallway. I lay there half asleep when I heard it again. The footsteps. This time they were closer, almost like they were right outside my door. I stared at the door, heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. The shadow. It was faint, but I swear to you, I saw the silhouette of someone standing in the hallway. At first, I thought maybe it was a trick of the light, or my eyes playing tricks on me because I was half awake. But the more I stared, the more I realized it was real. There was someone, or something, standing there, just outside my door, completely still. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just lay there, frozen, watching the shadow. After what felt like forever, it finally moved, slowly down the hallway towards the mirror. And then, it disappeared, just like that. I wanted to get up, check the hallway, but my body wouldn't let me. I just stayed in bed, staring at the door, until I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had all been a nightmare, but when I walked out into the hallway, I noticed something chilling. The mirror. The handprint was back, and this time it wasn't just one. There were several, smudged all over the glass like someone, or something, had been frantically pressing their hands against it. That was it for me. I called the landlord and asked about the previous tenant, figuring maybe they left something behind that could explain all this. He was quiet for a moment before saying, "The last tenant moved out in a hurry, said the place was haunted." Haunted? I asked him to explain, but all he would say was that the tenant complained about hearing things, seeing things, especially around the mirror. Apparently, they had similar experiences, footsteps, shadows, handprints. They left after just a few months, and no one had stayed long since. I didn't waste any time after that. I packed up my stuff and moved out the next week. I didn't care about breaking the lease. I just needed to get out. Sometimes I still wonder what was really happening in that apartment. Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? Was it something about the old building? Or was there really something there? Something watching me from that mirror? I don't know, but I'm not sticking around to find out. Hey everyone, I've been thinking about telling this story for a while now. It's not one I share often, because honestly, it's one of those experiences that leaves you rattled, even when you're just talking about it. But I figured, what better way to really get it off my chest than to tell it here? So, here goes. This happened a few years ago, back when I lived in a small town, way out in the middle of nowhere. Like, you know the type, right? Just woods for miles, only a few houses scattered around, and one main road that leads to, well, pretty much nothing. And let me tell you, this town, dead quiet at night, too quiet. So it was late, maybe around midnight, and I was driving back home after visiting a friend who lived a good hour away. Now, normally, I wouldn't be on that road so late, but I'd lost track of time, and there I was, driving alone through pitch-black winding roads with nothing but the sound of my car's engine to keep me company. I remember the fog started to roll in, thick and heavy, so thick that my high beams were practically useless. It felt like I was driving through a cloud, barely able to see a few feet ahead of me. I had that weird gut feeling, you know, like something was off. But I brushed it off. I mean, what could possibly happen, right? Anyway, I'm inching my way through this fog, when out of nowhere my car starts making this weird noise, like this scraping, grinding sound, like something was stuck underneath. I pull over, naturally, because the last thing I need is to break down in the middle of nowhere at midnight. So I get out, flashlight in hand, and start checking under the car. Nothing. I don't see anything wrong, but here's where it gets creepy. As I'm crouched down inspecting my car, I hear this crunching sound behind me, like footsteps, but slow, deliberate. I freeze. The hair on the back of my neck stands up, and I don't even want to turn around, but I do. I slowly rise up, flashlight aimed into the fog behind me, and nothing. There's no one there. I'm standing in the middle of this empty road, surrounded by trees and fog, and for a second I think maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just the wind or an animal, right? So I shake it off, get back in the car and keep driving. But as I'm pulling back onto the road, I swear I see something move in my rearview mirror. Just this dark shape crossing behind the car. Now I'm freaking out, but I try to stay calm. Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me, you know? It's late, I'm tired, and the fog's making everything look weird. But then, as I keep driving, I notice this shadow in the corner of my eye. And it's not just a flicker, it's like something is running alongside my car, in the woods, keeping up with me. I speed up, heart pounding, but it doesn't stop. I can't see it clearly, just a shape, dark and fast, darting between the trees, keeping pace with me. I keep telling myself it's not real, it can't be real. But it's there. I can feel it. Now, at this point, I'm panicking. My hands are shaking, I'm gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles are white, and I'm just praying I can make it home. And then, out of nowhere, my car shuts off. Just like that. The engine dies, lights go out, everything. I'm stuck in the middle of the road in complete darkness with this thing somewhere out there. I try to start the car again, nothing. It's dead. My heart is racing and I don't know what to do. I grab my phone to call for help, but of course there's no signal. Classic, right? So now I'm just sitting there in the dead silence, staring into the fog, waiting for something, anything to happen. And then I hear it. That same crunching noise, footsteps getting closer. I don't even want to breathe at this point. I'm just staring out the windshield, eyes wide, listening as the footsteps come closer and closer. And then they stop, right next to my window. I turn slowly, and there's this face, pale with dark, hollow eyes staring right at me through the glass. I swear my heart stopped. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. Its face was twisted like it was trying to smile but didn't know how. And it was just staring at me. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, too scared to move. But then, suddenly, the car jolts, like something hit it, hard, from behind. And that's when I snapped out of it. I hit the ignition again, and by some miracle, the car roars to life. I floored it, speeding down that road like my life depended on it. Because it probably did. I didn't stop until I got home. Didn't look back, didn't slow down, nothing. I burst through my front door, locked every window, every door, and sat in the middle of my living room, shaking, trying to convince myself that it was over, that I was safe. But you know what? I never drove that road again, and to this day I don't know what I saw or what was out there. But whatever it wasn't just in my head. I know that for sure.